So how do you feel people should approach your book today, and how is the intellectual dark web and a critique of the new right still relevant today?
Well, I mean, I think it is relevant, very relevant, arguably. But look, obviously, on some level, it's this we're in an extraordinary moment, and so I don't want to. I think there's direct through lines to understanding some of where we're at that are in this book, and the intention of the book was not just to be a polemic about a particular group of people. It was to use them as a launching point to make a bigger argument about the ideological failures of the time we're in and the weaknesses of the left, and then give what hopefully is a little bit of help with a new framework. So I think if you look at it as that, this particular exercise in self-branding, I think I'm actually quoting from my book, is already pretty much done. It was a flash in the pan in 2018. Now, that being said, I mean, all of these figures still certainly have influence and followers, and have real, they're famous, famous members of the pundit class. But I think the thing that I wanted to do in the book, and it might surprise some people, and I hope I pulled it off, was honestly, I mean, I'm happy to do videos about how silly and dumb Dave Rubin is. I think there was, particularly a couple years ago, it was very important to lay out some critiques of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and so on. But the real purpose of the book was actually to say what's interesting about this intellectual dark web is that, like they themselves constantly say, there is a little bit of intellectual diversity in it. And in fact, there's an intellectual diversity that covers pretty much all of the bad ideas and ideological frameworks that we could use today, from, let's say, the neoliberal center to the hard right. Another image I'll use in the book, which I think frames this, is Bhaskar Sunkara has a great a notion of Hungary station, Singapore station, and Finland station. And what he means, just really briefly, is Hungary is, say, that represents the Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi, Netanyahu world. That is the neo-authoritarian tendency. And that tendency is to some extent represented in the intellectual dark web. They would deny it fiercely, but there is some of the same preoccupations about immigration, about lost hierarchies, this type of thing. Then in Singapore, and again, this is a really, really broad way, but it fits, is the idea of let's have technical, scientific, and capitalist competence at the expense of democratic process. And that is certainly represented in the intellectual dark web. And then there in Finland station is, it's Lenin going back to the Soviet Union, and without litigating the entirety of Soviet history, which is obviously not the time and place, we can all agree that on some level, 1917 represents a human impulse to more broadly democratize our lives. And obviously, I think that impulse manifests in any number of ways, from general strikes to the freedom struggle in South Africa, to the social democratic agenda of Bernie Sanders, to the presidency of Lula, to indeed, the Cuban Revolution. And my book is an attempt to say that third option, that Finland station, is not, it's got some momentum, but it does not have the power in today's world. The world is really a contest in terms of governing between Hungary and Singapore station. And also we need to build a really successful Finland station project. And the last thing I'll say really briefly is what it attempts to do I'll just leave it like this, is also address why is it that in the pop culture, and this is, I think has changed in the last couple of years to some extent, but it's still a factor. Why do these arguments find such enormous weakness in sort of liberal terrain and what can be a deeply appealing answer that speaks to people's material conditions, but also has, by the way, a global answer, not just a one that responds in American terms, which is what most of these debates end up looking like.
Okay, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm Forrest Miller, and I'm here with J. Andrew World, and of course, Zer0 Books publisher Doug Lain. So I wanted to start with that because, by the time this comes out, it might be a few days past this, but, on Tuesday was the year anniversary of Michael's passing, and I felt like, I felt like I needed to, talk about Against the Web with you a little bit and how that book came to pass because, number one, because Andy, of course, designed that beautiful cover for it. And because, I think for that book kind of gained momentum just as Michael had passed. And it seems like, it's really like blown up. Like so many people have read it, own copies.
Well, I can tell you how it came to be that Michael decided to write about the intellectual dark web. And how he decided to write a book for Zer0 Books. He, when he started the Michael Brooks show, apart from the Majority Report, he started to hustle, and he reached out to a lot of different people to get on their platforms and to make connections. And I was one of those people. I was really actually flattered that someone from the Majority Report of Michael's stature was bothering with the little YouTube channel and small imprint, and we became friends out of that. I mean, I had him on a couple of times, and I invited him to go to a conference in Boise, Idaho, on the topic of Jordan Peterson and trying to respond to Jordan Peterson. That I had been invited to, and then I invited him. And so it became a natural thing for him to write a book for Zer0 Books. That's actually one of the things I do with the podcast, and is I interview people who I hope I might get books from, or I try to vet people as to get books from. And so that's
an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Todd McGowan was recently on the podcast, live stream or the video. He did a video with me, and he's going to write a book for us now. That's what came out of that conversation. So yeah, it's a successful. Michael Albert has written a book for us, and it started with an interview. So that's something I do.
He's a super interesting guy. I think the second episode of Ben's show that I live produced was when they went back and forth about participatory economics. And like the first question I jumped on in it, I think in any show I felt comfortable asking him about like what the actual political system would look like. And he was like, that's an interesting question. We'll have to figure that out.
Huh. Well, yeah, no, he's a long-term American radical. He's been around. He did Z Magazine. He was an editor at South End Press. He's friends with Chomsky. I'm really glad to be publishing his book, and it is on Paracon. But back to Michael, I suggested to Michael that he write a book about the intellectual dark web, because we had been getting some success on YouTube critiquing Jordan Peterson. There was a lot of interest in the intellectual dark web, and I thought he was the perfect person to stand up against Sam Harris, maybe in particular, and Dave Rubin. And he was perfectly positioned to launch a counter to the IDW. What happened was the book took a little longer to write than we did initially anticipated. So by the time the book came out, the intellectual dark web's day in the sun was almost over, and we were a little nervous about that. But there was a lot in Michael's book, and there's still a lot in Michael's book that's not just about the intellectual dark web, and his critique of the IDW went well beyond just critiquing the individual personalities, but it's worth reading, and will continue to be worth reading. But working with Michael was great fun. He was a little bit of a diva, but he was always making jokes that at my expense that I had to laugh at. So that so
Yeah,
I enjoyed
I
that.
kind of got the a lot of the technical side of his. I don't know if I'd call it divaness, but I was his YouTube guy, and I was his like editor. So like for all of the TMBS videos. So I kind of got like the everyday like all right, how are we doing? How's the analytics looking? How like those kinds of texts.
Oh
And,
yeah, no, yeah, right, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that he was difficult at all. It was just that he was really ambitious and
yeah.
really confident.
He had a healthy
And
ego.
yeah, he was. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
He constantly texts. He'd be like, "We're really doing this, bud. We're gonna get this." Like with a bunch of exclamation points. And I'd be like,
Yeah, right.
But the show was like taking off at the same time, so it's like a realistic confidence.
No, he was doing great. You know, the world was robbed of Michael Brooks, but Michael Brooks was also robbed of his future, and the realization of his ambition. He was going to go places. He was going places for sure.
And it feels like in a lot of ways, Against the Web is kind of a manifesto, I guess, laying out both, arguments against the IDW, but also how, like future groundwork for Michael's political project, which constantly was kind of in flux, I guess, as he, expanded his reading and like as he expanded how he was thinking about things. And he was someone that really could like absorb different ideas and make them his own in a sense of like he was never stuck in any, I guess, ideological like pigeonhole. Like his mind was constantly expanding and his ideas were constantly expanding, and I really like that about working on the show because there were times when it would just be obviously IDW dunking, but like more and more he would it was almost like nation by nation his ideas about like what each country in Latin America, for instance, or like what each country in Africa, like as time went on, as he met more people and had more conversations, it was constantly like a growing project, I think, in his mind, which you don't see very often. I think people get stuck in their ideological like an ideological bubble and they don't expand past it. Michael was constantly expanding past it.
Yeah. No, he was amazing. His book did well, and I think it would have done well regardless. But it really, it's troubling to me how at Zer0 Books we've had two authors become major sellers for us through death. That would be Mark Fisher and now Michael Brooks. And I'm really trying to come up with a better marketing model than having to have the authors die in order for their books to sell.
I'm getting flashbacks to that Saturday Night Live sketch where they were they had Dana Carvey was this rock star, and they're just like, okay, you see this chart, look at how big Jim Morrison is after he died, but look at I forget the 70s rock star that they picked. Like, notice his career just like fizzled out right here. If he died, you know how big he'd be today? So our plan for you is to die.
Right. Yeah. But that's not the case with Michael. Michael was going to go out. He was not going to. This was just the beginning for him.
It also kind of, as the left kind of splintered at the end of his life, and it was, everything was like he had no, like I feel like with Mark Fisher, the whole like his mental health was obviously intimately tied with his work. Like as his depression got worse, at least from what I've read of his work, because I've read like a fair amount of it. Like as his depression got worse, his introspection about the left and like his work kind of got better, which is like, that's not really a model I think that's sustainable either. But
no.
But with Michael, this really felt like a beginning for him, and it's really as the left is splintered, every kind of leftist faction goes. I think Michael would agree with me about this. In this, and it's tough to see that, and it's tough to see that in like intra-left debates where Michael would have wanted no part in that. I'm like, like the truth is when things like like force the vote or something like that happened, Michael probably would have gave his opinion but not weighed in on individual personalities, and kind of as the careerist model of like, because I feel like there was a long time during the Bernie campaign where left media was kind of not harmonious maybe, but like all kind of shared the same set of goals. And as that's very much not been the case, and as like the incentives kind of take over, as in like people wanting to build their media careers and taking an ever shrinking, I guess, piece of the pie. Everyone kind of wants to claim people that can't say something for themselves now as their own. And it's frustrating to see that, I think, because I think in Michael's case, he would have wanted no part of that.
Yeah. You know, I remember talking to Derek Varn probably around the time that Michael's book was coming out, or maybe a little before that, and saying, you know, when Trump is gone, this big left media moment will go with him. and I think if Bernie would have won, my prophecy would have been proven wrong, that in fact the left media would have been absorbed and corporatized and institutionalized, and, you know, it would have changed. Everything would have changed. But I don't think that was ever really in the cards.
Yeah. I mean, there was a minute there where it seemed like it was a distinct possibility, but I also think that it would have been a little bit harder to, you know, as Bernie's agenda maybe didn't pass the way that it should, you know, with him in office, and as people started to kind of get disillusioned with it, I don't know if, you know, things would have splintered into factions that way too.
Oh, well, there would have been those who became White House leftists, you know, and would have had plenty of money, and there would have been a different floor and a different ceiling. You know, there would have been a lot more power on the social democratic left. And yeah, for at least a while. But maybe in 4 years, it would have, you know, all blown up as Bernie lost for a second, you know, election, or died or whatever. But anyhow, enough of the alternative future. Let's talk about local hero.